Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today I have a review that I'm very excited to bring to you, and this review has been a long time coming. So a couple of years ago, I don't know how many years ago, it was a few years ago, I remember seeing a review on these watercolors. I'd never heard of them before, but the review was done by Kimberly Crook, who has a fantastic YouTube channel, a fantastic website, and she is a virtual Einstein when it comes to pigment information, watercolor quality, doing tests on them, and she had reviewed a larger set of Rosa watercolors, and they just looked phenomenal. But unfortunately, I couldn't find them to purchase anywhere in the United States, and that kind of always been percolating in the back of my mind. I would love to try these watercolors someday, but I just hadn't seen them offered. I generally will shop for these unusual brands on Amazon, because I typically will purchase my art supplies from Blick Art Materials, Jerry's Autorama, occasionally Cheap Joe's, occasionally Mary Artist, and if those companies don't have them, then Amazon. And for some of these foreign brands that are smaller, you don't find them at the, art suppliers in this country. You'll have to find them on Amazon. So about 6 months ago, I saw them on Amazon, and I placed an order for a larger set, and I knew it was going to be a while for it to come because I think it was being shipped from the Ukraine, but then eventually my order was canceled and I never got them. So then one of you guys commented that asked me if actually a bunch of you had asked me when I was going to review them, and I told you guys my order was canceled. But then someone else recently posted that they were considering buying a botanical set, and they were back on Amazon. So I had a look, and I decided to buy this set of 12 Rosa watercolors. Now, I didn't film the unboxing. Honestly, when they came in, I just stuck the wrappers down in my sketchbook, and I did just a swatch of them. And as you can see, I swatched my two yellows before I remembered to put a black pen line down to test transparency, so that's why the yellows just have a little spot there where I did that. We'll get to that in a second. So here we are finally with these paints to test. So I got the 12 set because I looked at the sets that were available, and there was this 12 set, and I paid $15.90 for this set. There was a set of 24 that was in a cardboard box as well that was like $29.99, so right around $30. And then they had some sets in tins, but I figured I really didn't need the tins, and I just wanted to kind of get a basic set so I could determine the quality of these paints. And as I looked at the larger sets, I saw a lot of mixed pigments and colors that I wouldn't necessarily use, or colors that could be made from a basic set of pigments. Like, they were more convenience colors, so I figured I would just go with this basic set of 12 because I loved the colors that they included. Now, these are in a just a plastic tray. You can I recommend popping the tray out, then you can push the half pans out, and here's what the half pan looks like. They have little kind of tapered corners. They are liquid poured. On the bottom there is the Rosa logo like imprinted, but there's no other information on the pans. But if you wanted to, you could stick the wrappers to the bottom of the pans. I didn't. I stick them in my swatch page just because I like to have all that information right there, but you definitely could do that. Besides, the way that I work, as you can see, I'm kind of messy, and the sides of the pans get pretty gross, so I knew a paper wrapper stuck on the back of that would be kind of disgusting. And we'll compare we can compare the size of that to other full pans, just so you have a point of reference. But anyway, that's how it comes. It's also got these two little areas here, which you could use for mixing. But I think, honestly, the best use for these little divots would be maybe to add a couple other colors that you might find useful in this set, so you can kind of round it out a little bit more. Because this set is not going to be for everyone, however, I've spent the last week digging and swatching and mixing and trying to figure out what the catch is. Why are these so cheap, and why are these so good? And the price has gone down. Since I bought these, the price has dropped to $13.99. So it's kind of a steal, and I've had to hold myself back from ordering another set just for backup, because I think that's a fantastic price for what you're getting. You could also take packing tape, and you could laminate the inside of your box here if you wanted to use that as a mixing area and take this for travel. However, I don't think these paints are going to be best suited for travel because they are very sticky and kind of goopy when you start painting with them. They re-wet very easily. If you live someplace where it's very arid, like high altitudes or the desert, something like that, where your paint tends to kind of shrink up and crack on you, these would be the paint for you because they wouldn't. But because of that, you wouldn't want to be storing this on its side and traveling with it because your paint would migrate. These actually remind me a lot of painting with the Mission Gold paints. I thought they would remind me a lot of White Knights and Yarka paints, but they do somewhat, but they're not as much as I thought they were going to. They remind me more of the Mission Gold, actually more of the Mission Silver class, because those big paint pans that they have, kind of the texture and stuff remind me of that. Although I would say the colors in here have more unique characteristics per color. You don't have all of them the same, which I feel like with the Magello Mission Gold paints, like all the paints have a very similar laydown and smoothness to them. They don't have that variety, like it doesn't feel like you get more granulation from this color versus that color. And I feel like each of these colors kind of had their own personality, which is something I personally like. But if you're an artist that does not like granulation and wants every color to be very uniform, these probably won't be for you either. So I decided, since it was only 12 colors, I would do a mixing chart, and that's what I did here. So basically, when you do a mixing chart, you take, you make a grid this is a 12 color set, so I did a 12 by 12 grid, and then you mix each color together. So down the center, you're going to get each pure color, because you'd have, say, cad yellow with cad yellow. So when I do a chart like this, so I don't end up with the upper and the lower exactly the same, I have my top color dominant. So when I'm mixing, say, cad red light with cad lemon, I'm going to have more red in the mix on top, and I'm going to have more lemon on the mix on the side. So I always have the top color as a dominant color in the mix. So that way I get a little bit more variety. Now these are only 2 color mixes here, so it's going to be a fairly simple chart, but you can of course mix more than 2 colors together to get more variety. So one thing I've noticed with these colors is that I got some really beautiful texture with some of these. The cad red light has a beautiful subtle granulation. Now you're not going to get as much granulation effect on a chart like this because I'm not soaking the paper. I mean, I'm not really getting it wet. I'm just kind of mixing the colors on a palette and putting it on dry paper just so they don't run into one another. But I'm going to show you some granulation samples where I purposely tried to force the granulation out of some of these colors so you can see what's possible. Ultramarine blue obviously is a granulating color, so you get some beautiful, look at the ultramarine blue plus cadmium red. That's a beautiful textured color. Wonderful things. Now, I had some really interesting surprises here that I wouldn't have come across if I hadn't done a mixing chart. And look at the mixes with sepia. Sepia is not a color I usually use, but I just love the subtle modern tones I'm getting mixing the sepia. Umber. That's another one that actually I thought umber would be the color that I wanted because that's a single pigment brown. I'm like, oh good, PBR7 browns. I love that when they make burnt sienna with PBR7. I'm going to love that color. I swatched the color umber out and I was like, oh, that's kind of a bummer. Umber's a bummer. It's a bummer umber. And had I not made the mixing chart, I might have just kind of written that off like, well, that's too bad. But when I did the mixes with umber, umber actually has a lovely granulation quality to it, and it's kind of a weak color, so you can add a little bit to something and get a beautiful effect. So look at these beautiful, like almost vintage pastel tones you get by mixing the umber with the other colors, and that nice texture to them. And here with umber as a dominant color, it's a little more drab, but if you just use a little bit of umber in the predominant color as the secondary color and use more of the other color, you get a gorgeous arrangement of color. Look at the umber and yellow ochre. That would be a lovely base for a fair Asian skin tone. We've got that really pale but clean complexion. It's just, there's just some really gorgeous mixes there, and I love the mixes with the sepia as well. And those are things, mixing with browns isn't something I typically do. So doing a chart like this can be very helpful. Now you're probably going to look at this chart and say, there are some omissions. There are some colors here that you're not going to get from this set. And one omission you're going to get from this set would be your pinks and purples. So the cooler red we have here is madder red, and you can see it here. It looks kind of like an alizarin crimson or alizarin crimson hue. It's made with PR 177 and PR 264. So those are moderately light fast. They're pretty good. They're pretty decent. They really give that alizarin color. I think what I really liked about this palette is that it felt like a very traditional watercolor palette to me. And so I think it kind of like was very nostalgic feeling to paint with. So I'm trying not to be biased as I'm reviewing this because I was really enjoying these. And I think a lot of that has to do with the colors that I used when I started watercolor painting. But because of that, that's not going to give you really pale pinks. So I do have a swatch where I watered that down. Let's see, where did I do that? I watered the pink down here somewhere. Right here. So if you just take that red, that madder red, which is your cool red, and you water it down, you're not going to get a very satisfying bright pink. You're going to get kind of a muted red, and I don't really recommend watering down that color that much because I think you may have some fading issues in tints with PR177 as your base color, whereas using it full strength you shouldn't really have much of a problem. So I think in this little spot here I would add a quinacridone rose or a quinacridone magenta, PV19. That's a very stable light fast color and it gives you a very vibrant pink, and you can also mix it with either of your blues to get a vibrant purple. So when I went to mix my purples here just to see what I could get, the madder red and the ultramarine blue, so that blue leans more towards purple, that red leans more towards purple. Still, you're not getting a super saturated purple like you would with a dioxazine violet. So if you really like to do a lot of purples, I would also recommend putting a PV23 dioxazine violet in this little section here if you're a botanical artist. There are botanical sets that Rosa makes. The set of 12 doesn't, or a set of 14, it's either 14 or 12, there's no browns in that set, so I think that might be irritating to have to mix your brown all the time. The larger set has, I believe, has some browns, but I didn't see that on Amazon when I was just looking. I think it sold out. But there's also a modern set, which I think if you're a botanical artist, I would go for the modern set. And I think it's either 21 or 24 colors, but I think it would give you a better range of the pinks and purples that you would want, and also the grains that you'd want for a botanical set. But anyway, that's pretty much the only downside of this set that I see, is that you're not going to get bright pinks and purples if you're a botanical artist. So you'd want to add to it. But otherwise, I was really pleased with the mixing capability here, and even colors that I thought might be kind of a bummer and kind of a waste of a space in a 12 color set. Actually, I turned out to really love these browns and neutrals when I started mixing them. I mean, look at that mint with yellow ochre and emerald green. That's kind of gorgeous. So the more I use these, and I'm looking for what is the catch? Why are these so cheap? How, they have real cadmiums. How are they so cheap? I just couldn't, I'm like trying to find the loophole, trying to figure out what is wrong with these paints, and I can't find anything that's wrong with these paints. Now, like I said, nothing's wrong with them, but they might not be for you. For one thing, some people do not like granulating colors. I love granulation, and so I just did some experiments to try to figure out what sort of granulation I could get here. So here I did ultramarine blue, emerald, and umber, and I got a really pretty soft granulating green here. Now this is actually, I'm painting on the back sides. There's some crappy paintings and some other test sheets, so this isn't even on the heavier sized paper, but if you can get granulation on this, you shouldn't have any problem getting granulation on whatever you're painting on. That's just for control's sake. This is just ultramarine on its own, so we got some beautiful breaking apart of the pigments and granulation there. This is ultramarine and umber. Stormy sky, man. Can you imagine? Maybe I'll hold these up a little bit closer so make sure that you can see that really good. So that would be a perfect stormy sky. Ultramarine blue and madder red. Gorgeous, almost rose of ultramarine type color, but instead of a quinacridone rose, you're using a madder red, but that gives you a beautiful texture. Cad red and ultramarine, look at that. Isn't that pretty? It's almost like a natural amethyst. Like if you were to look at a hunk, like a chunk of amethyst, that's kind of like the tones that you would be getting there. Gorgeous, gorgeous granulation there. For this one here, this is really pretty. This was Sepia, bright blue, which is a phthalo blue, emerald green, which is a phthalo green, and ultramarine blue, and I just really like that. I thought the sepia could help with the granulation, and of course the ultramarine blue would help with the granulation. I don't think the sepia actually did much with for granulations, because here I did sepia, bright blue, and emerald, and I didn't get any granulation. So I think it's definitely the ultramarine that's giving us the granulation here. Here we have ultramarine blue, emerald, and cadmium yellow light there, and that gave us a really pretty, fairly vivid green with lots of texture. This was emerald plus just green, which this uses the color green PG8, which is the same as Russian green in the Yarka and White Night paints, and the same as Hooker's green and some other brands, and that is not a very light fast pigment, especially if you water it down, so I would probably avoid that unless you're using it in your sketchbook, and plus it's a little on the dull side, and you can mix much nicer greens with your emerald green. So if there had to be a throwaway color, I'd probably ditch that and put something else in its place. But it is a pretty green. It's not an ugly green. It's a pretty green, but it's just not going to be the most light fast. So if you mix it with something, the green could fade out, and then whatever you mixed it with is what remains. So this is just something to keep in mind. But I was curious to see if that green granulated, which it didn't. This is Cadmium Red, Ultramarine Blue, and Madder Red. And again, we got a beautiful textured kind of eggplanty color, which is nice. I really had these wet, that's why you see some kind of puddly backgrounds. And here we have bright blue plus umber, because I wanted to see what sort of granulation I could get with the umber using nice bright blue. And then I was doing some experimenting with the emerald, which is a phthalo blue, phthalo green blue shade, because we know the green is not going to be light fast. So I was thinking, what kind of beautiful earthy greens can we get with that? And here I did the cadmium yellow deep and cadmium red and emerald, and I got a beautiful granulating earthy olive green. And here I did emerald plus yellow ochre. Now, of course, you could mix that emerald with lots of different yellows that you already have. The yellows in this set are cadmium yellows, so they are semi-opaque. Now let's look at the colors themselves. We've looked at, I showed you this, I think, but I'll just show you again. This is split primary mixing, so cad yellow medium, cad yellow lemon, bright blue, which is a phthalo blue, ultramarine blue, madder red, and then cadmium red light. So you do get a great split primary set here to mix with. And here I just did the bright blue, because a bright blue, also known as phthalo blue, is transparent, where ultramarine blue is semi-transparent, so it's got a little more opaqueness to it. So sometimes when you mix your phthalo blue with your cool red, you actually get a brighter purple because it's transparent and appears to be brighter and more vibrant than mixing with ultramarine blue, which is somewhat opaque. So it kind of dulls it down a little bit, makes it a little less vibrant. So I will also sometimes mix my purple using a phthalo blue, even though that does lean a little bit more towards green. Its transparency makes it more vibrant. I hope that makes sense. I know I'm covering a lot because I've been like so geeky with these colors this week. Oh, and I did a cool mixing color wheel and a warm mixing color wheel. So mixing the warm colors, no surprise, it is kind of dull. Because each of your warm colors is a little bit more on the opaque side than you would normally have. Like say, if your warm yellow in a set was gamboge or Indian yellow, those are going to be more transparent than cadmium yellow. And cadmium red, also a granulating semi-opaque color, and ultramarine blue, a granulating semi-opaque color. So yeah, you're going to get muddier mixes here. The cools, I got a fairly decent mixes here. Of course, we got a great orange over here. Orange over here was kind of dull. Nice green. Purple is okay, but yeah, I think I would take each color you're trying to mix on its own and go that way. And I probably would pull in some of the greens, and I would honestly myself, I would just squirt out a smidgen of, you know, permanent rose or permanent magenta and dioxazine violet myself if I was going to do any serious flower painting with that. But I just wanted to, I want to give it to you all here so you know what to think. Even though it's not an expensive set of paints, still, I think it's important to know what you're buying. And I have to say, I would recommend this smaller set over the larger sets myself, just because it's so versatile and it's such a workhorse of a set. In fact, I've thought about, you know, picking up another one while the prices is low, so I have, you know, more cadmium colors because I really like cadmium colors. So let's look at the colors, the pigments here. Cadmium Lemon, PY35, beautiful, highly light fast, strong color, lifts easily, is semi-opaque as you can see from that little sample there. I'm just, you know what, I'm going to zoom in and we're just going to look at the page that I'm talking about because I want you to be able to see that. Then Cadmium Yellow Medium, we have again PY35. They can take the same pigment and treat it different ways, mill it at different levels, and that's how they get different colors from one pigment. So you may have the same pigment but have a different color. You know, it can shift even warm to cool within the same pigment. FYI. The Cad Red Light is actually a mix of Cadmium Red PR108 and Cadmium Orange PO20, and it has a subtle granulation and it's lovely. So these are semi-opaque colors. As you can see some haze on top of when I do the glaze here. These are very, very light fast. I really like using these colors, but if you're after super transparent and colors that are not containing cadmium, which is a heavy metal, and there's a lot of debate over the toxicity of cadmium. I think if used as it's supposed to be, as it's intended, you're totally fine using cadmium watercolors, but I totally understand why people might want to avoid them. With cadmium paints, you want to make sure you don't eat, drink, or smoke when you're using them, and also don't let your pets drink out of your paint water, which is a good idea anyway, but if you have a cat that likes to hop up on your table when you're painting, you got to make sure that you really adopt good studio practices when you're using cadmium paints. But if you do, and you wash your hands when you're done, like before you eat anything, you should be fine. Do not spray apply these. Oh my gosh, guys, if you get this set, do not use these paints in an airbrush. You do not want to be breathing in cadmium pigments. So just keep that in mind. Do not spray apply if you are going to be using those paints. In fact, I would almost just write that on that box and not even use any of the colors in this set to spray apply, if you're someone who also likes to use an atomizer or an airbrush or anything like that. Then we have our Madder Red. Madder Red is made with a mix of PR177 and anthraquinone red and PR264, which is a pyrrole red. Pyrrole red is pretty light fast. So is the anthraquinone red. Not as, I don't know if they're quite as light fast as quinacridones, but they're pretty good. They're a great option for alizarin crimson. They're good in full strength. I wouldn't thin them down like this though. If you want to really have really pale pinks and thin down your paints, I would go with a quinacridone rose or quinacridone magenta, because it's going to give you a little better light fastness and more strength. So when I was just making my notes on the pigments in these paints, everything got a check mark as light fast except for the green, and I put an okay on Madder Red just because I want to make sure I mention not to thin it down too much. But it's actually related to the pigment PR83 they use for alizarin crimson, and if you love that classic alizarin crimson, if you were taught traditional watercolor painting, or you had an instructor that had been painting, 50 years ago, you were going to be familiar with alizarin crimson, and you're going to get the feels when you start painting with that, because it really does. It's one of the best alizarin crimson duplications that is light fast that I found. But still, I would urge you not to thin it down too much. Then let's go over to this other page. Green, Russian green. I'm familiar with this color in the Yarka St. Petersburg and White Night Lines. I actually like this color, but because I know it's not light fast, especially in tints, I would urge you to use this green and mix your greens from it. It's kind of a shame because it's not a bad green. It's kind of like a good hooker's green color, but you can, like if you had this plus cadmium orange, for instance, that makes a gorgeous sap green. That's the M. Graham sap green that I really love. You can definitely mix some good greens with the yellows and like a little touch of the red from this set. Like if I show you this one here, actually think this green's a little bit more luminous, and that's the that green plus that yellow plus that, because I didn't want it super bright. I didn't use a lemon, which would be what you would mix for a brighter green. I didn't use that because I wanted an earthier green, so I used the warmer green, and I used a touch of the red to get that more earthy green. So I feel like that's a prettier green than that, and it's going to be light fast, because your color's only as good as the least light fast color you mixed with. So I'd probably pull that one out and put something else in. You could put a sap green convenience color in there, or whatever. But I really like having a PG7. So this right here is, they call it emerald green. It's PG7, also known as phthalo green blue shade. It's a beautiful mixing green on its own. It's a bit much, but you could mix it with a Madder Red and make yourself some really deep, dark blacks. Use it with yellows and oranges to make gorgeous earthy greens. It's a nice color. Mix it with your bright blue, which is PB15:3, which is a phthalo blue. Mix that for beautiful turquoises. In fact, let's do that. Let's just mix that. It's so pretty. I need a brush. And so yes, you'll need a mixing plate if you're going to do that. So we can take a little bit of the bright blue. You take a little bit of the emerald green. I mixed it pretty light, and we'll just do a little. I mean, see, you can get gorgeous aquas and turquoises. You can use them bolder. It's pretty. They mix really well. It's gorgeous. They're gorgeous paints. They're clean, and I just can't believe how cheap they are. Then, of course, we have our basic Ultramarine Blue. That one already has a good sized dent in it because I use that color more than any other color on my palette. And yeah, it's great mixing colors there. And then we're going to go into our earth tones, which we have a PBR7 Umber, which is kind of dull, but as I've mentioned, gorgeous for mixing and pushing the granulation out of other colors without changing them too much. On its own, it's kind of bland, but as a mixing color, I think it works. Yellow ochre is a mix of PY43, which is natural yellow ochre, iron oxide, and PY42, which is a synthetic. And the synthetic can actually give it a little bit smoother and more uniform of an appearance. To me, this almost looks like a PBR24 Naples yellow, which is another color I really like, so I'm not mad at this color. I'm not mad that it's a mix because it's basically a natural and a synthetic version of the exact same pigment. And actually, they can be using synthetic pigments like PBR6 instead of PBR7 because the paint companies have lobbied to keep the names the same because they don't want to confuse the customers. They don't want people to not buy a paint using PBR6 because they prefer PBR7 when chemically it's pretty much the same, but they don't use the natural pigments anymore. So it's a big thing. But anyways, this color here, Sepia, is a mix of PBR7, which is a very light fast brown, PBK7, which is a light fast black, and PR177, which is the base color of our crimson up here to give it a little warmth. It's gorgeous, it mixes like a champ, and it just gives you the most gorgeous looking earth tones, earthy, modern, vintagey gorgeousness. I love it. And then we've got Mars Brown, which is surprisingly a mix because it looks like a PBR7 burnt sienna, but no, it is a PY42 plus PR101, which is a iron oxide that gives you that reddish, like Indian red, Venetian red color, and PBK7, which is our you know, lamp black in there. So yeah, that's what you're looking at with these paints. So I'll show you some artwork here that I have done with these paints. This was just a loose floral because I was looking to see what sort of purples and pinks I could get. Now I did mix both reds together to get more of a coral tone in that. And that's where I'm like, yeah, you really would probably want a quinacridone red or quinacridone rose, quinacridone magenta if you're a botanical artist, but it was fun to paint with. And, but actually I used them more for some World Watercolor Month. Like you can get a very smooth effect if you're painting them on a less sized paper or you're working fairly dry with them. I did not do that one with it. I did this one with it. That's that madder red. Isn't it pretty? I used a little bit of ultramarine, I think, in there to get the shadows. No qualms, very easy to handle. And I used them on a painting in here. Where are we? Right here. I'm going to zoom back out a little bit. I used them on this, and again, very easy to control. They dilute down beautifully. They're very smooth when you use them on dry paper. And or you can really push that granulation effect if you use them in really wet washes and you make sure to use one of the granulating pigments in there. So it's really an all-around great set. I highly recommend it. I think it'd be a great set for beginners, but not children due to the cadmium in the paint. But if you like granulation, go for it. If you like a traditional palette, go for it. I really have nothing negative to say about this except, you know, use your best studio practices because of the cadmium, and just know that some of those colors are semi-transparent instead of fully transparent because they are cadmium based, and that's just, or ultramarine, that's just the name of the game. That's how those paints react. I love it. I'm curious to know what you think in the comments below, and I will link to this set that I purchased in case you want to pick it up too. And you probably get a better deal than I did because I paid $15.90 for mine, but I still think it's worth it. And honestly, I'm surprised they're this cheap. Oh, I wanted to compare the size of a Winsor & Newton full pan versus that. Oh, one other thing I want to mention is that these are a poured pan versus an extruded pan. And I find that it seems to me that the extruded pans last a lot longer for me. It's like, I feel like the poured pans seem to be a little bit, they use up quicker, like they might be a little less. So it's a little bit shorter, if you look at that, a little bit shorter, about the same height, and that's it from the top side. Maybe a little bit wider. The same with the plastic, but the extruded pan comes in a little bit. I think these have like maybe 0.5 milliliter more paint than this, and of course a liquid pan I feel just doesn't have as much paint as an extruded pan, but that's nitpicking for how cheap these paints are. This is the Cotman range of Winsor & Newton. And I give it 10 out of 10 stars. You really can't beat it for the price. I actually compared these to the White Nights paints that I had too by Pigment mixes and whatnot, and because there's been speculation that these paint companies might be somewhat related because of the proximity between the Ukraine and Russia where the White Nights are made, but I didn't see a lot of similarities in the pigment makeup. I didn't see a lot of similarities in the application. I found them to be quite different myself. Now this is a Yarka White Nights pan, and they are like the same width. Can you see that? Pretty much the same depth. Whereas the Winsor & Newton pan's a little bit bigger. So I think you're probably getting about the same paint in a White Nights or a, oh yeah, this one back out of here. So you're getting about the the same size as a White Nights, but you are getting a little bit less than you would get from like Winsor & Newton. And I don't really know about other companies that offer full pans because those are the only major brand companies that I have used the full brands for. This is a different one of the, but it's still a Yarka pan. Yeah, those are also a little bit smaller. And this is what a half pan looks like, just for some reference, what a half pan size would be, just to give you a little bit of point of reference there. This is one I filled myself, but still gives you a good size about what you're getting. So you are getting 12 full pans, and generally like 12 half pans of any major brand would cost around $60. So you're getting 12 full pans for 15-ish, or whatever the price tends to be when you order, when you look. But yeah, I think it's a wonderful deal, and I hope you found this useful. And that's all I have for you today. It seems like it's been a lot. We've gone through a lot of stuff. It's been a journey. And I want to thank you so much for watching. Please give me a thumbs up if you enjoy these in-depth reviews. I will grab photos of this stuff and put it up on my blog. So if you want to zoom in and take a look, you can see. And with that, I bid you adieu. Thank you for watching. Until next time, happy crafting.